paperwork. Thank you.
You're watching Southern California's CBS 2 News at noon.
A true story of survival here. By all accounts, 13-year-old Trevor Schulte should not be alive today. He suffered massive injuries after being thrown off his bike, but he was wearing his helmet, and that probably saved him.
He is living proof that a bicycle helmet can save a child's life. This afternoon, a 13-year-old Huntington Beach boy is heading for home from the hospital following a bike accident that nearly took his life.
Elsewhere, a 13-year-old boy fights off death after getting hit by a car while on his bike. Now, he had a helmet on his side, and he willed to survive.
A teenage bicyclist struck by a car in a bicycle lane is back home tonight after a miraculous recovery. Channel 4's Jim Giggins says the boy's family is giving full credit to his bike helmet.
To turn to your husband as the doctors leave and look in eyes that must mirror your own, realizing that your child is going to die. It's unimaginable.
This is her son, 13-year-old Trevor Schulte of Huntington Beach, before being released from Children's Hospital at Long Beach Memorial. 2 months ago, he was on his bicycle, in the bike lane, wearing a helmet, almost home, when he was struck by a car.
My head hit the windshield and made a big hole, and I ended up on top of the car with the bike. And so I flew off and did a flip and landed on my back and broke 3 bones in my head.
He was rushed from Huntington Beach to the medical center at the University of California in Irvine with massive injuries. His parents were told to prepare for the worst.
In our minds, we had already given our child up to God, and we were just praying for the next minute.
After he leaves here, he'll still continue his therapy. He's just ready now for the next level.
Perfect, okay?
And ready to get out of the hospital. Judy Schulte took her son home this afternoon. A 13-year-old who defied considerable odds and a horrific collision.
Okay, man of the hour.
Months of therapy still await Trevor, but today it was a hero's welcome. And in true team fashion, Trevor shied away from the attention and headed for the pizza. His mother, though, was grateful for the quick attention of firefighters and the support of her neighbors.
Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. We're just happy to be there.
Oh, boy, I'm happy you were there.
It's great to see him home.
The simple act of wearing a bike helmet may have guaranteed Trevor Schulte's homecoming.
When people say that miracles don't happen today, I want them to take a look at my son, because he is just a miracle.
June 22nd, 2000, it was a good year somewhat. I was just getting out of 7th grade, and it was 5 days into summer, and I was psyched. My whole summer was pretty much video games, baseball. That's all I needed for contentment. But that summer, things got a little rerouted. I was riding my bike, just getting some donuts from the donut shop about a couple miles from my house, and I was on my way back, and this car came up behind me. And as you kind of saw / heard, it was a 16-year-old with 2 underage kids in the car because he had just gotten his license. He just randomly stole his uncle's car that day and was going about twice the speed limit, between, they said, about 60 to 70. And he was drinking from this water bottle, and he decided to put it down in the cup holder, but he missed. Fell into the passenger side's floorboard. So I reached down to get it, and his body moved the wheel moved the car, and bam! I flew back into the windshield, and my head, as you saw, it shattered. New Zealand, sorry. My head totally shattered the glass. And then I was there on top of the vehicle as it was still going, but I wasn't technically on it. I was being propelled by it. So I was still mid-air as this car was racing forward and speeding up and propelling me forward. And he was driving so close to the curb that my head and arm literally hit a lamppost, which flung me around into this awkward position, still midair, and then he freaked out, sped up, turned to the left. My momentum kept going forward. I did this misty flip, and then bam, skidded out on the tar at about 70 miles per hour, bounced off the curb, fell back into one place, and was basically, at that point, choking on my own blood. Now, I happened to be the luckiest kid ever hit by a car, because in that moment, there were these policemen that were going into my neighborhood on this prank phone call, and the robotic arm came down and whacked their back windshield. So they were kind of upset with the guard gate guy, and they went out to talk to him, and then in the midst of that dialogue, they see me just fly through the air skid out on the ground, and then one hops in the patrol car, goes to catch the guy. The other one comes over and pulls my head out of blood, which at that point, again, I was choking on. It was just not at all an ideal situation to be in. And you can just imagine, my mom's awakening to what was going on was when she was leaving to get groceries, and she pulls up to the gate, but she can't get out because there's so many cop cars and ambulances, and then she recognizes her own son being there on the floor. By all means, it was just devastating. But they put me into the ambulance. They took me to the nearest level 1 trauma hospital, which in that case was UCI Hospital. Now, just to kind of specify, I didn't actually know this until a few years ago. There's different types, different levels and degrees of hospital. So level 1 is pretty much the most severe. If you're in a situation where life is like, you're clinging to it, they'll take you to it. And so I thought like, okay, well, what's that comparable to here in Yuma? And I recognize that you guys, the closest you have right now is you have a level 3 in town, the Yuma Regional, I believe, which Dustin used to do bivocational work at, but then the closest level 1 trauma is actually in Goodyear. And that's, Abrazo West Campus, 2 hours and 10 minutes. Your closest level 1 trauma is the same distance to the Goodyear as it is actually to San Diego, Rady's Children's Hospital. But it was something where it's a very unique hospital to be in, and a very bad place to find yourself as being one of the registered participants, I guess you'd say. But they wheeled me in, they put me into this induced coma for only God knows how long that, because they were just looking at me. They called my parents in, who arrived there right after, and they sat my mom and dad down and said, look, Mr. and Mrs. Schulte, your son is in a pretty dire circumstance. It appears right now that he has 11 fractures. His tibia, his fibula, his sacrum, his ulna, his pelvic bone. There's a bone in the back of his nose that's kind of fractured, and there's a C3 fracture to his neck. You hope that doesn't progress into any paralyzation. He has 3 head traumas as of right now. One of them is going to affect his memory, and I actually forget what the other 2 affect, but it was something where this diagnostic that was being given was not good. And so you could only believe what it was like for my parents to just recognize there in that moment. As you heard my mom actually say, our kid's gonna die. Our kid's like literally in the place of the hands of God right now. And so the only thing that they could do, because they didn't have the medical professional degrees and capabilities to be able to fix me, was to pray. And they fervently prayed, they passionately prayed. This was 2000, so understand that social media back then was basically like AI to us. We're tasting the first fruits of it, but we don't have like iRobot happening yet, and soon to be, I'm sure. But back then it was the same thing with social networks, because like they weren't really in existence, but we had email, we had stuff like that. So they sent out these prayer chain emails, and within the first day or 2, I had a couple thousand people, many which I didn't even know, that were praying for me. They were praying that somehow I'd be able to get out of that. Because beyond just the head traumas, that they actually had to drill bolts into my head to be able to release tension, because my brain was swelling so much that it was about to implode, that they had to be able to do that and monitor every second of me still ticking. And a couple of days go by, they draw on my mom and dad and say, look, Mr. and Mrs. Schulte, your son realistically only has about 30% chance of making it beyond this first round of surgeries. So he just wanted to give you the heads up about that. My parents actually went back later to the same doctor and asked, okay, give us the real stats, what was it? And he said, we didn't even think he had 10. It was just something where odds were not in my favor. But the day came and passed, the prayers were said, and the next day I was still ticking, I was still alive. And the doctors called me in, and my parents, and then they said, look, he's gonna live, but he's gonna be blind. The day after that, oh, he's not gonna be blind, he's gonna be deaf. The day after that, oh, he's not gonna be deaf, he's gonna be mute. Oh, he's not gonna be mute, he's gonna be dumb. It was all these different things and all these precautions. And day after day, they would just pray as much as they could and leave it in the hands of God. And somehow, 20 days later, I woke up from this coma, and I was only half blind, meaning that in the sunlight I have a very high sensitivity. So back then I had to wear these big, granny sunglasses all the time just to kind of not blind myself even more. And then I'm half deaf. And if you ask some people, they say I'm half dumb, but they're not doctors. They don't know that stuff. But it's just one of those things where the chances of me coming out the way I did, we actually asked one of the physicians, they couldn't, there's no way to put an exact ballpark, but they were saying probably 1 in 2, that I'd be able to be cognizant enough and aware enough to be able to still function after all that had gone on. But, again, it's one of those things where with God being the healer, with God being as majestic and glorious as he is, being the author of life, he can also be one that enables it to be so that I still had a chance. And that's what I was banking on, and at the same time, I was waking up to this whole new identity. Because again, memory shot. I was basically like, the easiest way to put it, didn't tell him full well, it's like a computer. Say like you went and got a MacBook Pro, which good job, good job. Say you got the MacBook Pro and you were on that side of the wall, and you opened it up the first time. You flip it over, it's like, and then you see that like you register, everything's good, and you hit the desktop for the first time, and you see right before you have all these applications and these folders that are empty, but you have all these different functionalities that can work because they know how to process in certain ways, in different ways. I was like that, where I was a computer fresh out of the box, where I knew how to do things, even still juggle, and I knew how to do all those things, but the memory bank, wiped clean. So when I say I literally didn't know, I don't know who I was, I literally did not know who I was because it was all gone. It was like the memory bank gone, whoosh. But it was also exciting because I felt like, oh my gosh, I'm still alive. Like this is amazing. And apparently before that I wasn't. It was just baseball and video games, which again, it's great, right? But I also realized that maybe life has a greater substance than just this. And so I realized at that moment, maybe I should take my search to the church. Now, to be fair, I had been raised in such a way where I was familiar with Jesus. I had gone to church off and on my whole life because my mom was raised in Oklahoma. She was an Okie, so she was a major Christian. And then my dad was from the East Coast, so he was saying he was an altar boy for Catholicism. And he was always saying like, yeah, I'm a greater Christian than you. I was an altar boy. It's great. I'm glad you have that spotlight put on you. And it was just one of those things where I was raised in that atmosphere, and I still had those influences, and they raised me with virtues, but I didn't know Jesus. I didn't personally invest in him. I didn't have an interest beyond just reading him in a book as a heroic figure. And so from that point forward, I started to think, I got to make this something more. I got to make this of greater substance. And I started to go to church out of my own motivation, and I became basically Jesus freak because I wanted to know why I was still alive. I wanted my life to have purpose. I wanted to make sure that the fact that I was still alive wasn't a wasted miracle of God's. And so when I gave my life to Jesus that year, 7 months in, I recognized the importance of laying it all out before Jesus and surrendering. And ironically, as they were announcing me as a kid hit by a car, as I was entering the baptismal, I tripped and fell into the baptismal. I don't know. Maybe it was an accident. Maybe it was on purpose. I don't know. I was on a lot of drugs back then, medically prescribed drugs. It was something where I was still jived about Jesus, and I was so glad that I was seeking something of great purpose. But even though I had that gusto, even though I was ready to just run to the cross and give my everything, there was still a thing called recovery. Now, recovery isn't an easy thing to do, especially when you've had 3 traumatic brain injuries. Because when you're in such a brutal circumstance, you kind of have to go with the flow. My brain literally had 3 areas where the head traumas were, where it stopped the blood flow. And so instead of the blood going the normal way and activating certain cells and capillaries and all that stuff, it had to reroute itself. So I became a different person altogether. I used to be a huge introvert. I had 2-word conversations. I mean, that was the essence of my conversations back then. Now I go to places like Subway and I know how many kids the manager has by the end of the order, just because it changed me, man. It made me different. Because God, in a sense, rewired me. even though my brain was still stuttering, he made sure it became something where I still had the functionality to move forward. And actually, come to think of it, you look at what I do nowadays, I don't think I would have ever been able to stand in front of people and actually talk, because I just didn't have that as part of my brain chemistry. Yet God made it to be something in which the rewiring made it serve a purpose in the big picture. Now, in the years beyond that, I went back to school, and it was great at first because everyone wants to know the Coma kid. But then later on, since I was at the age of just getting into high school, my maturity level was knocked back a couple of years. So at the time, well, it was 8th grade I came back, I was acting more like a 6th grader. No offense, 6th graders. I mean, everyone goes through that phase. But it was something where I just didn't have the awareness. So when I hit sophomore year, and everyone's kind of like almost over-maturing, because I think it goes like immature to over-mature, and then eventually you find your place. I was stuck back here. And people started to notice and point me out. So I no longer was like, Coma kid! It was just kind of that indifference. And it felt weird and interesting altogether, but it was part of my recovery. I was still having my brain adjust to all the nuances, but also all the medications that I was on. Beyond that, I actually had episodes where I would act out a source before teachers. One time, I was in the nurse's office to get some medication, and I'll be honest, I was flirting with the teacher's assistant, or the nurse's assistant there, and then the nurse comes over and says, "Trev, time for your medicine," and I'm like, because it was like one of those trigger words where it made me feel different, the fact that I had to take medication. And so I followed her into her office, and I didn't yell, per se. I just raised my voice really loud. And she was kind of just standing around, and I just decided to hightail it. I got out of her office. I went out the front of the nurse's office and slammed the door. And it led to this point where I actually ditched school that day. Cops rolled up to me in a cul-de-sac, about 6 cars. And they understood kind of what was going on, but eventually they called my parents in, and I didn't get into any hot water outside of just ditching school. But it was something that the next day I called into the principal's office, where I had to meet in this boardroom with a bunch of officials from the school, but also from the school district. And the first thing they kind of lay out there is like, Trevor, you're going to have to go to a rehabilitation camp, or you're going to have to get yourself put together again before the start of next year, or you're not coming back. And I, of course, went, whack, this is baloney, which probably wasn't what I said, but, and then I get up and I just storm out, which gave them even more reason to insist that would be happening. But then it was on my parents to have to find a way to get, locate a place for me that was addressing post-acute head traumas. They told me I was going to camp. I was like, great, I love camp. They didn't tell me it was a rehabilitation camp in Carbondale, Illinois, a city that's pretty much only known from some weird, wacky video game where apparently a flying saucer dropped some aliens in it or something. I had no idea where this was, but I had to go there. And it became something where that was the fate for me in the summer. But I thought, okay, whatever. Even though this is something where I'm going to have to go do this, and I'm going to have to work through this obstacle, I'll be done with this. I'll return back home. Everything will be, I'll be clear on all levels. I'll be able to go to church camp, be able to go to CIY, and have that moment with God. And I'll be restored. It'll be good. So I set out to work, and I was there amongst these kids that either were born with a neurodivergent issue that was affecting them, or they had it because of a happenstance, a trauma. For example, the kid in the room next to me, his mom had beat him with a bat so severely on the head that he was indefinitely stuck at that high school level of maturity. And so you can just imagine, I'm going into this place, and I'm seeing my peers, and I'm recognizing what lies ahead of me, and it was just like dark, because I'm thinking to myself, like, this is what I'm being seen as right now. I thought that I was fine. I thought that I was recovering. I thought that this car accident was just a footnote in the past. But apparently, this is where I have to be. But again, I just thought, okay, I'll get to the 3-month mark, be good, find my pathway back to Jesus. 3-month mark comes up. The lady calls me into her office and says, look, Trevor, you're just not there yet. You're just not ready to go home. We can't sign the release. You're gonna have to stay here longer, not just a month, probably another 6 months. And when I heard that, it was like one of those moments where you have this long, long tunnel of darkness, right? And you have this little flame at the end that's flickering, and that serves as your hope. It serves as what you aspire, the place you aspire to go to. And I felt like it was just snuffed out. And now I was in just complete darkness. My hope apparently had just been demolished. And so I just, at that moment, I just got up and I ran out of her office. I ran out of the building. I ran across the campus as all the counselors were running after me. And of course it's raining because it has to be like one of those scenarios. I get to the chain fence and I actually found a spot I could dig under and go through, and I'm crawling through the mud. I'm going under these bushes and trees, and I stand up and I look ahead of me and I see miles and miles and miles and miles of these trees in Carbondale, Illinois, where there is just nothing. And I just fell apart. I fell to my knees and I cried out to God. I said, God, why am I here? Why am I facing this? Why do I have to be in this position where I'm at the suffrage of what happens? I have to go through everything. And I wasn't even driving the car. I wasn't driving the car. I was just left in silence because I didn't know what to say before God. I said, God just left me. But it was then when I just felt the Spirit just sweep over me and lift me up and just remind me of His presence, His love, His grace, His everything. That it would be the thing that helped me to survive. So I stood up, I went back to the fence, I crawled under, I went back into her office, I sat down and looked her eye to eye and said, what do I got to do to get out of here? And so from that point forward, whatever was told of me, asked me to do, I did. Whoever asked me to follow them, I would follow. I was subject to God and whoever He put in my path to help me find the road to recovery. And going back to it, that lady said, I went back to her office a month later and she said, we've never seen such just an abrupt turnabout. We've never seen this happen so quickly. It's something where we just don't understand, but you're going home. You're going home. And that to me was that moment where I just felt that the message, actually, I want to have, like you understand, is that God was at work. And He wasn't just at work right then, fixing my broken train of life. Sad song. It was something where He was there through it all. He had not abandoned me. God with us, Emmanuel. Jesus was the living embodiment of it. And I realized at that moment, my hope was back. It wasn't my own thing. It wasn't only, my hope wasn't built upon the things that I could do to get out of there. It was built on being a servant of His and following Him into wherever land He told me to go. And ultimately, it became something that just helped me to get through the rest of the recovery and then some. Recognizing that God is at work. And in John 5:17, it's that reminder that Jesus gave that the Father is always at work. He's actively present in our life. No matter what type of story we have, I have, you have, remember, God is at work. He's piecing things together. He's meticulously making these things work to be better for you, to make you into something great and beautiful. And even in the dark times, He's building this refinement in which He gives you patience and endurance. And it's not a mistake when times get dark. It's something where you have a moment to connect with God on a new level. Think about Noah. He spent 120 years building a boat for a flood that hadn't even happened. You have Abraham. He waited 20 years for God to actually show him how he would become a father of many nations. You have Moses. He waited 40 years in this desert before God popped out in a bush. Joshua waited 40 years to actually go and be led into the promised land after all the unfaithful died. Elijah, he waited 3 years in the drought until God told him to pray for rain, and it came about. The disciples, they waited 50 days in this hostile town because they had a message to speak, and they heard that there would be a counselor that would come and lead them. You see, God isn't done in whatever dark you're in right now, or you've been in. God's not absent. He's at work. He's leading you in your own way to become something of His masterpiece. Because I realized in that moment that as you look at a picture, it's not just bright highlighted colors, right? There's contrast. there's bright colors, there's dark colors, it all works together and majestically to form this beautiful image that God is ultimately crafting and that you can become, that is your story. And that would be my prayer to you guys, especially with you going to camps, is to be open and real before the Father, to trust Him that regardless of where you're at right now, that you know He has the best in mind for you, that He's not left your side, that He loves you so much, that even when you cry out to Him, laments, because they weren't nice prayers I was saying there in Illinois, but He still heard, and He still loved, and He still stood by my side, and He will do the same for you, because it's in His design. As Solomon puts it, every season is beautiful and is good in its own time, the good and the bad. Or as Paul puts it, for God works all things together for the good of those who love Him, for those who are called according to His purpose. My prayer for you all is that whatever your story is, whatever chapter you're in, that you would not discredit the author of life and making it become beautiful in due time. He will make your story be one in which you are loved to the point of sacrifice, loved beyond belief, and that you have a mercy that just covers you and makes you into something that you still don't even know yet. You still don't even understand. But God is not done. He's actively at work. The question is, how much will you allow Him to craft you, to be potter and you the clay, and for Him to ultimately give you your life, your direction? And as I was seeking